November 13th, 2024, Board of Douglas County Commissioners 5:30 business meeting. There are paper copies of the agenda by the door if anyone would like one, and of course the full packet is available online. We get to start this evening with a proclamation. This is for Community Foundation Week, and then we have some members of the public who will also come and speak about that, but I'll go ahead and read our proclamation. This is for November 12th through 18th, 2024. Whereas Community Foundation Week was created in 1989 by former President George H.W. Bush to recognize the important work of community foundations throughout America and their collaborative and innovative approach to working with public, private, and nonprofit sector. And whereas Douglas County Community Foundation, or DCCF, has since 2000 been a public charitable organization for the people of Douglas County, including the cities of Baldwin City, Eudora, Lawrence, and Lecompton. And whereas DCCF was founded thanks to a major gift from the late Tensie Oldfather of Lawrence, Tensie, who gave generously to a wide variety of area causes, hoped that her example would attract other gifts to the foundation. It's for everyone who wants to help, she said. Whereas DCCF is a community leader and the mission to connect diverse citizens and communities of Douglas County through charitable action and to create permanent philanthropic resources for the current and future needs of our community. And whereas Kansas Community Foundations provide the opportunity for individuals from all walks of life to be philanthropists, with over 116 community foundations, affiliates, and area funds in Kansas. And whereas one of the greatest ways to ensure a strong community, economic vitality, educational success, and effective community leadership is through the active presence of a community foundation that allows for local, community-based endowments. And whereas DCCF provides beneficial grants to our communities, supports critical community causes and efforts, strengthens nonprofit services, and makes our community stronger. And whereas DCCF, over its nearly 25-year history, has granted more than $70 million. And whereas it is critical to set aside a time to recognize the value and impact of community foundations on a statewide, regional, and local level for the investment, partnership, and leadership they create across many of Kansas's communities. Now, therefore, the Board of County Commissioners of Douglas County, Kansas, do hereby proclaim November 12th through 18th, 2024, as Community Foundation Day in Douglas County, and encourage all citizens to recognize and support the impact that Douglas County Community Foundation and its donors have in our community. Adopted this 13th day of October, 2023, by the Board of County Commissioners. I believe we have Chip Blazer who will come and speak some about it.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I am Chip Blazer. I'm the Executive Director of Douglas County Community Foundation, here with my colleagues Heather Hoy and Lori Trenholm, and Lori's husband, Sean. We appreciate this very much. The mission of the Community Foundation is to connect the diverse citizens and communities of Douglas County through charitable action. Basically, our goal is to increase the quality of life for those citizens of Douglas County. We appreciate this commission and your professional staff in carrying out that same mission on a daily basis. So thank you. We appreciate you very much. And we are here to help. Thanks.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for the work you do in our community. We will hold this for Commissioner Kelly's signature, and staff will get it to you next week if that's all right. But thank you all for being here. That moves us to our consent agenda for this evening. We will have our consent agenda followed by general public comment and then our regular agenda. And then we'll have appointments and commissioner or administrator miscellaneous. When we come to our consent agenda, we will first ask commissioners and then the public if there are any items you'd like to pull for further discussion. When we do general public comment, we have some rules for that. And those are that each speaker is limited to 3 minutes of speaking time. However, we always accept public comment of any length in writing, and especially through email. Individual speakers may not donate unused time to other speakers, and all comments must address topics within the jurisdiction of the County Commission. We also maintain the decorum of our meetings by prohibiting public comments that are threatening, aggressively hostile, or belligerent, fighting words, slander, or speech that invades the privacy of individuals, unreasonably loud, disruptive, or repetitive, or that interrupt or substantially interfere with the board's ability to conduct county business. We do reserve the right to mute or remove any speaker who violates these public comment rules. At that time, we'd ask for your full name and address for the meeting minutes and to address your comments to the commission. Please know that comments received by the commission during our meetings do not necessarily represent the views of Douglas County government, but we value the input. We don't usually respond to general public comment on the spot, but if you leave your contact information with staff, staff, we will try and get specific questions answered. After that, we'll have our regular agenda, and for each action item, we'll hear from staff or an applicant or both, followed by questions from the commission, and then open that item up for public comment relative to that item. Once we've heard public comment, we'll close that and bring it back to the commission for further discussion and a vote. Lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on the county's YouTube page and website. For our consent agenda this evening, we have items 2.1 through 2.7. I've been asked to pull item 2.3 and from our agenda for a future, that item is not ready. So 2.3 will not be considered as part of our regular consent agenda this evening. And I had a couple of typographical errors that were addressed and are updated in the copy of the minutes from 8:21 and from 10:23. So those are now current. So given that, and that we do not have Commissioner Kelly with us this evening, I would entertain a motion, or first let me ask, are there any items you would like to pull from the consent agenda for further discussion?
None for me, Commissioner.
Is there any member of the public who would like to pull an item from the consent agenda for further discussion? And seeing none, Sarah, do we have anyone online? All right, thank you. Now I'm ready.
As Commissioner Reed, move to approve consent agenda items 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. This is our time for general public comment. Do we have anyone who would like to give general public comment today? Come on up. Thank you.
My name is Robert Elder. Our family owns a farm at 571 East 1000 Road in Willow Springs Township. And last week, Jens got to hear a very interesting study about flooding in the Washington Creek Valley. And a couple things I took out of that study was that Washington Creek is very prone to flooding. And if there's any more development in the area, it's going to get worse. And of course, I was a geology major in college, and our farm is on Chicken Creek, which is a major tributary to Washington Creek. So I found this study to be exceptionally interesting. Now, most of it focused on flooding in the bottomlands, but all of that is downstream, literally, from the uplands where our farm is. And you have to keep in mind, Chicken Creek, across our farm and a couple neighbors' farms, it's dropping at about 100 feet per mile, which that's a pretty steep gradient for the Midwest. And then it hits the Lawrence Shale on our farm, which is like a giant wet sponge. And so all of this water goes down into the valley very quickly. Now, we are doing our part to try to prevent flooding. Most of our farm is actually timber, and we're leaving it as timber. And, you know, the gentleman who farms our land does no-till, and our farm has historic stone fences that help to slow down the erosion and other issues. So we're leaving all of those intact. Now, the problem is, as the study showed, if there's a lot of commercial development, parking lots, issues like that getting developed in the region, all of the water is going to run right down into the valley much quicker, and it's going to make flooding much worse. The 2019 flood was reportedly about a 500-year flood, but I'm not yet 500 years old, and I've seen plenty of floods in that valley. So I hope you will take this study seriously and really consider ways to mitigate the flooding, mostly by encouraging the area to be left as it is in its natural state. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who'd like to give general public comment? Seeing no one else in the room, Sarah, do we have anyone online with a hand raised?
We do. I'm going to promote Greg Nice to the panel.
Okay.
Greg, you're in the panel. You can come off mute and provide your public comment.
Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
All right. So I live on 1061 or a mile off the projects has taken way too long. I noticed on your agenda tonight about some more projects on N100 or on 1061. I mean, this has gone on for months and months and months. And when's it going to be finished? And I hope the commission is giving deadlines to your construction projects on 1061. It's been a dry year. The road hasn't been bad in front of my house. I live on N100, which is a bypass for the construction on 1061. But now it's wet and my road ends up being 207th Street in Johnson County, which is a straight line to the Edgerton Co-op. So the road is getting tore up. And so when you guys do these construction projects, are you giving them a deadline? And when's my road going to be open?
Are you done with public comment? I'll have a response for that. I don't want to take your time, though. Mr. Nice?
Yes, sir.
Okay, are you done with public comment? I'll try and
No,
get you some
that is a
answers.
public comment. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure when you're doing these new, what it said, N900 to 700 in the consent agenda, that you put timeframes on where they can get those done and the 1061 not be closed.
Okay, thank you for your comment. If you can contact me over email or staff, I can get you connected with some answers for that from our Public
Thank
Works.
you.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, do we have anyone else online with a hand raised? Okay, thank you. I'll flag that. With that, that brings us to our regular agenda, and I believe we have Catherine Week is going to walk us through our first planning item.
And I apologize, commissioners, that I think the bulb and the projector is flickering. I can verify that it is still live on Zoom. So if that goes out, Catherine, you can probably see what you're saying, but it's just, I think we probably need to replace the bulb, but I can verify that on Zoom it can be seen.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is, let's turn this way. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Catherine Week. I'm one of the planners in the planning office at Lawrence. We do the projects for Lawrence and Douglas County. So I'm going to walk you through a request for a rezoning and conditional use permit. These are two separate items. So when we get to the end, these are two motions that you would need and two separate votes, but they are linked items. So I'm going to present them together for you just in the interest of time. And so this is the general location. The address for this particular property is at 1760 East 1100 Road. This is the general location. It is just south of I-70 in the northern portion, just north of Lawrence, in the northern portion of Lawrence. It is actually adjacent to Lawrence on three sides, but is still located in the unincorporated portion of Douglas County. Advance this here. There we go. This is kind of a closer view to give you kind of general idea of what's happening in this general location. You can't see the property right now on the screen, but when it comes up, it is highlighted in teal. It shows that there is city limit border on the north, just along I-70. You can see it there in the black dotted line. On the east and on the west is also city zoned property within the city limits. And then to the south is a similarly zoned area. This property is in the CP zoning district in the county, which is the Clustered Preservation District. And we can talk a little bit about that if we need to here in a minute. It's basically a rural residential district. The reason why this request is before you is that the property currently has a residence and an accessory structure on the building or on the property, And that building is housing a use for Shendel Landscaping. And so that use, which has some equipment storage, either trucks or trailers or larger equipment, falls under the use classification of equipment storage heavy. And that is a use that is only permitted by a conditional use permit and only in the AG2 district, not in the current zoning district of CP. So for this property to continue its use that originally started under a home occupation in 2020, the request is to rezone it so that it could continue to utilize that property and you could consider a conditional use permit for the use, continue to use the property as it's being used today. The zoning in the area, again, it's kind of surrounded by a multitude of zoning districts. Those red hatched or outlined areas are within city limits. We have some general public and institution zoning, some open space and rural, smaller residential lots. The RS5, for instance, is single detached dwelling. That green hatched area where this property is located in the outlined teal area and just to the south of it is all that CP or clustered preservation zoning district. That is a district that has since been retired in the new unincorporated zoning regulations. So now there's just the AG1 and AG2 in the county that can accommodate rural residences. That CP zoning district is not something you could zone to today. So that's just an item of note so that we know where this is going and why they need to go back to AG2. And they can't do that in the CP district. It's really honed in on rural residents. That CP district has a very limited number of uses. It's primarily geared towards that rural residential use.
Can I ask a question with that? So when we did the new county zoning, anything that was zoned agriculture but was smaller lots was automatically rezoned to Ag 2. But this also seems like it could have been automatically rezoned to AG2 in terms of size and use. Was that just not what was done with CP? I mean, CP retained itself even though we've retired that as a use, as a zoning.
I'm not sure I can answer that question. Sarah might be able to answer it. I was not the planner that kind of walked that code change through. I think Mary Miller was, and I'm not sure why the CP was retained.
And Carl, if you know more, go ahead. I just remember that I think we didn't want to blend too many things.
Good evening, Commissioners. It's my understanding that properties under the old code that were zoned to R or were platted residential lots were zoned as CP in the new code. That's my understanding.
So
That's
CP,
correct. I think I actually wrote that in my staff report now that I come to think about it. It was R1 in the old code.
got it.
And came in as CP, but you cannot rezone to CP currently. So
Thank you.
they were already residential. Okay, in this slide, moving in from the zoning to kind of the land use in the area, primarily we're still looking at ag land. That green, that large swath of the darker green is still land that's characterized as agriculture. That's primarily north of I-70 to the west. And then some of that CP district that's south of the property location is still registering as ag use. Even though there are rural residences on those parcels in that green district, it's still registering as primarily ag related use. So the yellow is rural residence or residential primarily use, and then that green is the ag. So you can see the character of the area kind of, I mean, does kind of fit with this lot. It could go either way. It could go towards rural residential, it could go towards ag. It's kind of surrounded by both. Just to kind of go over the key points on why this item is before you again, it's the property owner would like to rezone to the AG2, which is the transitional agriculture district, which are lots that are less than 10 acre or up to 10 acres. And that would be working towards coming into conformance. They've been in conformance previously with their home occupation. The scope and the expansion of what they're doing there has now come out of what could be accommodated under home occupation. So to continue to utilize the property in the manner that they're using it, they need to have it eligible for consideration for a conditional use permit. and that requires the rezoning to AG2. The property, as I mentioned, is Zone CP. It is located in Tier 2 of the Lawrence Urban Growth Area, which does have some implications. For instance, if they were to expand further beyond what could be accommodated in a conditional use permit in Tier 2, if you're going to do a commercial type business or development, you would have to site plan, and there's a requirement for properties in Tier 2 that are adjacent to city limits to annex. So there are other implications if it goes beyond the scope of what can be accommodated with a conditional use permit. This property is also located in that K10 Farmers Turnpike area plan. Future land use for that plan in this particular spot is for low density residential, which is what is occurring there currently. So that is something to consider when we're moving zoning districts or requesting different zoning changes. And it is in conformance with what is happening there currently. Consideration of the associated CUP is contingent upon that rezoning request, which is why there's 2 items. It has to garner the approval of a rezoning request before the CUP could even be an item of consideration, because it wouldn't be eligible otherwise. The property, as I mentioned, did have an approved home occupation use. I believe it expired in 2020, and I think zoning and codes does have a timeline if we need to look at that. And then COVID hit, and so it's been a process for this property. They are working towards compliance, and this is the path, really the only path for them to do that without having to relocate the business. So, and there is, as I mentioned, a rural residence, so it's not a vacant property, and that rural residence will remain on the property as well.
Catherine, a quick point of clarification. Did I hear you say that you believe that the home occupation permit expired in 2020, or was it issued in 2020? I actually had 2021 in my notes from earlier.
It may have been issued in 2020, and I think
since
Carl
expired.
has a detailed timeline. If we want to go through
Yeah,
that
that's why I
detailed
was.
timeline, we can do that.
That might be helpful. I remember seeing it in the packet, but I'm not finding it right
We can do
away.
that now. Yeah, we can talk about that.
Thank you.
I'm not sure exactly when the home occupation registration was issued or if it expired. It's my understanding that it outgrew the home occupation requirements, having too many employees, taking up enough space and the type of equipment being used. Therefore, the conditional use permit's required.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
We always put these slides in just so that we know what the review criteria are, in case anyone wants to discuss those review criteria. They are uniform throughout any rezoning request in the county. So these are the 9 criteria points plus the staff recommendation. So we can go through those in detail too if we have questions over each of the review criteria. And then just so anytime we're looking at a rezoning request, we kind of want to put before you a comparison of what uses are permitted in the zoning district that it's in now and what uses would be permitted in the zoning district that it would be proposed to go to. And these are uses that are permitted by right. So there are also uses that are permitted as accessory uses to these things, but these are the uses that are permitted by right in these zoning districts. And this just kind of clarifies that, that clustered preservation district is really geared towards detached dwelling use. And the AG2 zoning, it encompasses more of those rural type uses that you would see in AG1 and AG2. And so it does have some different uses that would not be permitted there today. So that's why we like to bring the list of uses before you so you know what you're comparing when you're considering a zoning request. Okay, so this is just to kind of show you what we're talking about when we would rezone. This is that parcel, and then it would change to that yellow AG2 district in the area there. And again, the items for discussion are basically kind of what I've already outlined in the key points. We can talk about them more in detail. If you have questions or need clarification, we can go into that. And then rolling into the conditional use permit, the review criteria are very similar. They're not identical, but very close. And we have, again, a list of criteria points that we have to look at, compliance with zoning regulations and use of the nearby property, compatibility with the character of the neighborhood, and suitability for the uses that are permitted in the current district. If there's significant adverse impacts on the natural environment or impacts to adjacent property or infrastructure, that is where conditions on CUPs come in, because those conditions can help mitigate any negative impacts that there would be for the conditional use. And then conformance with the comprehensive plan, and also an appropriateness of a time limit is considered for a conditional use permit. And with this type of use, which is heavy equipment storage or any type of equipment storage, staff is pretty consistent in recommending a time limit, just so that zoning and code staff can make sure that the property owner is still maintaining the property in conformance with that conditional use that's been approved. And so that gives zoning and codes an opportunity to, if there are complaints coming in, they can go out and do their enforcement action if they're not in compliance. This is the site plan, which you can't see right now. There we go. And this is pretty much documenting what is on the site now. And I think I mentioned this in Planning Commission, but the future shop is not there now. That's noted by future shop. But everything else is already on the site, as verified by the applicant and zoning and codes. And this kind of would act as the site plan. This is what we would be reviewing for noting the parking and making sure that they have adequate space and screening, meeting the setbacks for the use and all of that.
So Catherine, I know one of the conversations at the Planning Commission was whether or not the future shop location is part of this conditional use permit, or if it's not.
Yes, so conditional uses and site plans go together, but they are two different things. So the conditional use permit is an approval for the use on the property, which would accommodate the heavy equipment storage use. The site plan documents how they're utilizing the site for that use. It shows you the dimensional aspects where buildings are located potentially. Site plans can be modified after, and there could be changes if for some reason the future shop does not materialize, or it changes an angle or something that could, or smaller, that could be potentially administratively approved through the site planning process, or it could be approved through, if it is beyond the scope of administrative change, the site plan itself would come back before the Board of County Commissions. But the use is still approved. So as long as the use is approved, there could potentially be some tweaks to the site plan later if necessary. Yeah.
But in general, the site plan is not coming to us at this point for approval. That is a separate process that would most likely be administrative unless it's larger, and then it would have a public process. Okay, thank you.
And again, just a reminder, two different actions. The zoning request is required first for your consideration. And then this slide, just one little bit of correction. When I was reviewing my talking points for this evening, I realized that, Planning Commission voted 8-1 on the CUP, 9-0 on the rezoning, but 8-1 on the CUP. And the discussion, one of the planning commissioners had concerns that maybe not all of the township's potential concerns, although we didn't really get a concern from the township, it was more from the water district or the Cobb Valley Drainage District. But that vote was 8-1 as opposed to 9-0 on the conditional use permit. And they did vote to forward that to you with a recommendation of approval for both items. And that's all I had, unless you, one other thing, sorry. The list of conditions are as stated in the staff report, except for number 8, which there was quite a bit of discussion in the Planning Commission meeting about how to word this particular addition. And this condition is geared towards addressing those concerns that came up from the Drainage District. And this was the suggestion from the Planning Commission as to how to potentially word that. And that would be prior to any future development, that Douglas County should make a determination regarding whether the site's stormwater drainage is sufficient and if that meets county requirements. And then there is other activities they have to, or other actions they have to do. They have to go through the building permit process. There's some life safety inspections that they have to do, and there's also a floodplain development permit. So those administrative processes can kind of capture potentially this number 8, which was the recommendation from the Planning Commission. Got that too.
So if I'm tracking right, what you just said is that the administrative processes that would be required if the CUP, if the rezoning is approved and the CUP is approved and a site plan process moves forward, the stormwater drainage is a consideration. Additionally, Caw Valley Drainage District and the township both are given opportunity to provide public comment. Is that right? Or I guess would it be just the drainage district?
So this was geared just towards the drainage district, and they already provided the public comment, and they were at the meeting, and this kind of wordsmithing of the condition, I think, kind of addressed what the concern was, that if there was future impacts to impervious surface or any of those type of things, that there would be a way for it to be addressed. And the Planning Commission felt that through the administrative process, that is when this could be identified and addressed through those processes, so that they would do the mitigation at that point if required.
My understanding of point 8 there is that our regular processes kind of already capture that. It was just kind of a restating of that to make sure that the
Yeah, I
drainage
think it was
district was
just
heard.
formalizing it so that both the property owner is aware that there may be some drainage issues that have to be addressed in the future if development, additional development were to occur, particularly because there is some regulatory floodplain on the property, so.
But all of that would happen within the normal process of a building permit and site plan, et
And
cetera.
floodplain development permit,
Right.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I had.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Catherine before we bring the applicant up? Okay. I believe the applicant is here. Would you care to add anything to the conversation?
Good evening, Adam Williams. I'm the applicant. I'm also the resident on the property. So just like the Planning Commission, Catherine did a great job providing all the information that we have. There's not much more I can add to it, but I can certainly answer any questions you have about our desire to make sure that we stay in compliance. We're here proactively just to make sure that we do the right thing for the community. We've operated there for years. The use, the traffic, the impact is not going to change from what we've been doing. It's just the compliance issues are we aren't able to park all of our trucks inside anymore. And because of the seasonal aspect of our business, sometimes our employee count goes over the previous zoning that we had. So we're here just to make sure that we stay in compliance. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have for me.
Okay, we may. Thank you. This is a public comment item. Is there anyone who'd like to make public comment for this? Seeing nobody in the room, Sarah, do we have anyone online? Okay. With that, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission for any further questions, comments, votes.
Commissioner, I'm just making sure to track process-wise, since we are talking about 2 separate actions. So with regards to the rezone request, I think given the totality of circumstances and certainly in particular, the fact that cluster preservation is not something that we ascribe to anymore. And so I know there's been multiple instances of our zoning and codes office, I think, trying to both work with landowners around some compliance issues and also tidying up the way that we have all of our parcels coded. And so I appreciate it from that angle. I appreciate also understanding clearly after re-reviewing the packet and hearing Catherine's presentation and discussion at Planning Commission that there is not any anticipated change in use or increase in use or volume of use. It doesn't seem, that was sort of the big question mark for me going into the beginning of these requests. But understanding the history, it makes sense to me. I think I'm comfortable with the additional, well, actually, sorry, that's the next issue. So as far as rezoning, I think that I suppose the only thing that I'm particularly curious about is, it's not specific to this issue. It's a larger question about sort of home occupation. And we've had some conversations on the commission about looking at those regulations too. It makes me curious about other instances of folks that maybe when we used home occupation permits as a tool and they have, those uses have gone beyond the capacity of that tool or that tool just doesn't fit. But we don't have to go down that rabbit hole today, certainly, and when we're not a whole commission also, but I think that's something for us to unpack a little bit more, and I'm interested to hear more in the future about how zoning and codes is approaching that countywide.
Yeah, so in terms of the rezone, this parcel at 11 acres could easily have been AG2 from the start, so I don't have any qualms about making that change. It's a pretty minor change for this property and for this area. I do very much appreciate working towards compliance and working with our staff to get there. I know there's been, maybe under a previous owner, there was some things stored in the floodplain that are no longer. And so we just really appreciate the efforts that it takes to kind of bring that back to compliance. We are having a larger discussion as a county about rural home businesses and would love to have you engaged in that. If you have input and thoughts of having had a rural home business and then outgrown that about, what's healthy, and we really want to have a space where people can start businesses and grow them. At some point, they do grow beyond what the rural area can handle, and we need to work with the city of Lawrence for making sure there's spaces in town and that is possible. But I don't have any qualms about this process. The use is not changing, the traffic is not changing. The commercial portion of this is likely taxed as commercial. I meant to look that up, and maybe that's either I could look it up or I could look at Carl and see if he would, but our commercial uses are already taxed because this is the way the state does it, at twice the rate of residential, and so they're already paying more for the road use than a home alone would do, if that indeed is the case there. There was mention at the Planning Commission meeting, and actually we had a comment in our packet about some road use complaints. It sounds like those may have been from a previous owner or resident at that property, because I heard in the Planning Commission that there have been no complaints noted in the recent past. Is that, Catherine, can you address that? Or I could have Adam come up if he wants to.
Yeah, I don't think there were recent complaints. I think most of the complaints were prior, but I don't know if
See Carl nodding also.
they have a timeline, so they may have more detail on actual complaints.
I'm not aware of any recent complaints. Most of the complaints I'm aware of have to do with the previous situation where there was much more stored on the property that's since been cleaned up.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything else, Commissioner. I'm
Happy to make a motion.
okay. We'll start with the first one.
Yes. Okay. Motion to approve the request to rezone Z-24-1007, approximately 11.1 acres located at 1760 East 1100 Road from CP, Clustered Preservation District, to AG2, Transitional Agricultural District, based on the findings presented in the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in the resolution, and adopt Resolution 24-33.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes. Just a comment on the conditional use permit about condition number 8. And Adam, if you don't mind just addressing if it doesn't sound like this actually constitutes a change or a burden or something different. It's just kind of acknowledgement of processes that are already in place. Is that also your perception of it?
Yeah, it says future development on there, and as she alluded to earlier in her presentation, any future development of this property outside of what the CUP allows will require an annexation. It will require a whole nother process to where those people that study those things, like the downstream sanitary sewer or traffic or stormwater, they get notified and they tell you whether or not you need to mitigate water. And so I think it's just acknowledgement of that. I'm fine with that. It's a little bit redundant, but we're happy with that.
Right, thank you. And I believe, not pulling this up right away, but it's a 10-year limit. Catherine, is that correct on the CUP? 10 years. Okay. Commissioner, that's all the questions or concerns I had.
Thank you. I'm okay with leaving 8 as it is. The one, I just lost the number again, sorry. I just wanted to talk through number 2 a little bit. The business hours should be typical working hours during weekdays. I had highlighted that in my earlier notes just as, can we talk through that a little bit? It's kind of vague hours, and I understand the nature of the business and that it's seasonal,
Yes.
but just want to understand how it's defined for staff's purposes.
So I actually had the same question from the county counselor, so this is good that you bring it up. We left it that way intentionally because it is a seasonal kind of operation, landscaping. So during certain seasons, they may want to start earlier, like 6:30 or 7 a.m. and work till X hour, whereas in off seasons, they may not have that early schedule. It depends on daylight savings times and all of that. So that's why the wording is the way it is, because it leaves them a little bit of flexibility. However, you certainly have the option to, ask the applicant if there are typical hours that would accomplish all of that, and we can more in specifics in the condition, we could change it to X number, starting at X AM and ending at X PM if you.
And Catherine, we'd also have, by leaving it the way it is, if it was 3 a.m. ever, we would also have that opportunity to go back to the applicant and say that is outside work hours unless you
Correct.
define them further. So sometimes that flexibility allows us a little more leeway
Yes.
to not create a problem that isn't there.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
no, I
that is-
appreciate that
yes.
point, Sarah, and I had a similar thought. Mostly, I mean, CUPs, depending on the nature of them, certainly do have explicit hours of operation sometimes associated, but not all of them, right? It's not a blanket condition by any means. So not necessarily opposed to that language as long as, zoning and codes is comfortable with it and being able to sort of define and articulate that. I think, yeah, it makes sense to me. I'm not necessarily
thinking.
advocating for boxing in hours. I just wanted some background and understanding about the thought
That
behind
was the
that.
thought process.
Thank you. Yeah, please do.
So that one actually concerns me a little bit too, because in the landscape business, another thing you do is remove snow. And that snow comes whenever it's ready to come. And so let's say you're ready to open up your business at Monday at 8 o'clock in the morning, but there's snow in your parking lot, okay? We don't show up at 8 o'clock to get that snow. We show up at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock because we need that snow gone before the people open up their business. That way they're safe. So to box us in, I would say is not the way we would like to see it, because it's just not the nature of the business we're in.
Yeah.
And that's typically due to weather.
Sure, that makes sense to me, and I definitely understood that or assumed, I suppose, that was sort of a primary thought behind that. But to your point, I mean, I think I heard you say that one concerns you a little bit too. So let me ask instead of assume, does the way that it's currently worded concern you?
I don't know how else to word it. You know, the hours could be appropriate for that type of business, because there aren't set hours in that business. And there's weekends we have to work just to make sure we get the services done that are requested of us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If anything, I would like to see it strike it out. But if it needs to be in there, it needs to be worded to where we can do what we need to do for business.
Sure, understood. Okay, I have some follow-up questions for staff now based on that. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. I'm curious, and maybe this question is best pointed towards Carl, but what was staff's interest in having a condition related to time? Let me start there with that question.
It's basically consistency for these types of uses. This truck storage or heavy equipment storage or anyway is basically to mitigate any negative impacts. Staff specifically use the word should, not shall. So, and it's typical, which does leave some room for
Interpretation
yes,
and judgment.
Typical, obviously, a snowstorm is not typical. So if they have to go out for a week, weekend day where there's been a snowstorm, that I don't think would go counter to this. But again, we can tweak that if.
Okay. Carl, do you have some further feedback?
I would also point out that it says typical business hours, and for a snowplow business, given that snowstorms aren't all the time, and given that they are usually working very early in the morning or very late at night for that particular situation, that could be interpreted as a typical business hour for them.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So I appreciate you articulating that, Carl, because I do think, I mean, it's about the context of the business and the context of if you did receive a complaint, for example, that there were heavy trucks going by my house at 3 a.m. and it was a snowstorm, it seems pretty reasonable activity. There's sort of snow trucks and plows, be it private or city, everywhere, right? And so the context does matter. I appreciate that articulation, and yeah, that helps fill in the blanks for me a little bit, Commissioner.
So I really appreciate you bringing that. The only piece of it that kind of flagged for me, and I'm glad you got the other pieces, was weekdays. And that didn't seem to quite jive with what I think the business likely is. Was that a discussion, Catherine or Carl?
That wasn't really a discussion, but we could easily just strike weekdays. So it would stop at business hours should typically be typical working hours. Should, it's not opposed to shall, which means they would have to, but we could just strike that during weekdays, if that would make it.
And you need to put something seasonal, something that's typical for seasonal, or just, I don't want to open it up so broad that neighbors don't have some say here, but if
Sure.
need be.
I think, I do think though, actually just taking out the during weekdays and ending it at the typical working hours, I mean, I have confidence in our staff and also, this discussion about how the context of responding to a complaint is going to be considered. And so I guess I worry about getting more specific and adding things like seasonality or weather dependent. It feels sort of implied to me based on the nature of the business. The two primary things they're doing are completely weather and season dependent. But I appreciate the point about weekdays, and I, for whatever reason, wasn't questioning that part. But certainly the snow example is one where, you may not be scheduled to be working on the weekends, but then snow comes.
Do you want to address anything that we talked about? Or are you good with the way the conversation is going?
I'm good with the way the conversation's going. I think scratching weekdays off would be satisfactory to us.
Thank you. And I'm comfortable with that. If that.
Staff, do you need any further detail or direction about that? Okay. I'm ready to make a motion. Did we do public comment on this? I'm sorry, I'm getting my
Oh.
sequencing messed up
Let
because
me,
we,
let me do that.
sort of
Yeah,
talked
thank
about
you.
things,
So we
yeah.
did lump these together. They're two separate votes. I want to make sure we don't miss the opportunity. So this it will also be a public comment item. Is there anyone in the room who'd like to give public comment on the CUP? Seeing nobody. Sarah, do we have anyone online? All right, thank you, and appreciate you reminding me.
teamwork. As Commissioner Reed, I move to approve the conditional use permit, CUP-24-1006 for an equipment storage heavy use located at 1760 East 1100 Road, based upon the findings presented in the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in the resolution, and adopt resolution 24-34.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Thank you for being here, all of you. That concludes our regular agenda and brings us to appointments. We normally don't make a lot of appointments when we are missing a commissioner in the conversation. However, we do have an opening, or a reappointment for the Board of Zoning Appeals that is timely, and I am very comfortable with having Rich Barr continue in that role. Commissioner, are you okay if we were to move forward without Commissioner Kelly here for that?
Yes.
In which case, I would make the motion that we reappoint Rich Barr to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
For the reminder, staff.
Yes, thank you. And so for other appointments, we will hold those until our next regular meeting that we have all commissioners present. We have a few that are in the works. That brings us to Commissioner and/or Administrator Miscellaneous. And Sarah, do you mind going over your weekly memo?
Thanks, Commissioners. Just a reminder that the canvass is for the 2024 general election is Monday, the 18th. I want to see if I'll have 3 commissioners there.
Yes, I'll be there.
Okay, great. Also want to point out, the rest of those dates were on there before. Sheriff's Office does have a graduation ceremony for the Corrections Academy. I know commissioners were interested in some of those staff events, so if you're interested in attending, let us know. We have attached the Q1, Q3 2024 update on the Housing Stabilization Collaborative is in the packet, so there's some great data in there. And then a Place for Everyone community survey. The City of Lawrence and Douglas County have contracted with ETC Institute to conduct a survey of residents related to awareness and understanding of A Place for Everyone. So encourage folks to do that survey and check that out. Reminder that we have a work session next week on the 20th related to the Judicial and Law Enforcement Center Master Plan improvements. And then we will not meet on the 27th, and then we will come back again on the 4th. And commissioners, that's all I have.
One other scheduled item, I don't know if any other commissioners will be there. Haskell is hosting a climate change and children's health symposium. I plan to be at least at some of that. It's tomorrow most of the day, so I think I might be the only one, so I don't know that we need to mention it. But
And I'm going to check with Commissioner Kelly related to services for Jamie Lowe. If anyone had
Thank
plans
you.
to attend those, we may have
Yes.
more than one commissioner at some of those services.
yeah, I would like that. Thank you. Any other miscellaneous, Commissioner?
None for me.
I did attend along with Sarah and Jake. We were at the five largest counties in the state of Kansas came together to talk over some shared legislative priorities. It was a really great first meeting of that group. I think it won't be the last. I think the plan is to meet at least once more before a session really gets underway, and some maybe again around turnaround time. So that I think will be a really healthy conversation ongoing. And so as if other commissioners want to kind of weigh in on some of those priorities, I think the idea is to really strictly talk about economic issues at this point and kind of see how that group coalesces. So Sarah, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add about that. All right, that is all I have. If there's anything else? All right, then we are adjourned. Thank you all.